Morning, everybody. Welcome to another round of coffee and questions, or if it's late in the day, your favorite beverage. And so, again, I'll reiterate something. I belong to 3 forums, and we write articles and all that stuff, like I mentioned in my last video. And so, the other night, we were beating to death this thing about sanding wood projects. And I said, I made a comment back because somebody had said, hey, look, on one of your wood turnings, the finish is like great. It's like fantastic. How did you achieve that? And I told them, look, all of the projects that I do, I might use a different method of sanding. But in general, what I do is I'll take a piece of wood, I look at it, and I determine the first grit I want to start off with. Now, I'm going to show you a couple things, and I'll tell you how I went about doing the finish work. But let's talk about my sanding protocol for a minute. Let me go ahead and I'll put up, like a still picture of exactly how I go about sanding, and then I'll discuss 2 projects with you where I've sanded it and prepared it for the finish in 2 different ways. And like I said, it just depends on the project itself. Okay, now that's kind of an in-depth kind of a protocol. I want to talk about the first project first. And here's a sign that I made with a router. I sell these. It says open, and on the other side, it says closed. Now, this is a piece of pine I got out at Home Depot. And what I always tell people is, like, when you go out there, nothing's cheap anymore. Everything's gone up in price. So make sure you take a look at the wood in different ways, like, edge up, flat. Make sure you're getting a nice piece of wood that's flat and doesn't have any curvature and bends, and whether or not you want knots in it and all this other stuff, so that you maximize the amount of wood you're going to get out of each piece that you buy. But anyway, I get it home and I go ahead and I set this up. So let me explain the difference between a mediocre kind of a finish and an outstanding finish is spending more time on the project. Now, in the case of the open and close sign, we'll make this one a little simpler. This was pine, and yes, I did stain it. But in the preparation process, it looks pretty good for an open and close sign. And I started off by using 80 grit because it had some kind of bad imperfections in it. I always look at the piece of wood. Maybe I don't start at 80. Maybe I might start my protocol somewhere around 120 or even 150. It just depends on the surface of the wood when I go to start. But what I'll do is, in the case of these signs, I have a belt sander, and I can put anywhere from 60 grit, 80 grit, or 120 on there. Now, the wood wasn't that bad that I got out at Home Depot, so I started out with my belt sander in 120. And I did the surface, okay, and then I stop and I thought that's enough for the belt sander. I clean it off real good, okay, and then I have sanding blocks. I've got 2 of them here. I'll leave you links below on the stuff that I use. They're very inexpensive. They're made out of a hard rubber. They've got slits in them and like a nail or something in there that holds the sandpaper. And this is good for flat sanding, flat work. I turn around, I put 120 on there still. Even though I used 120 on the belt sander, it's got some pretty decent scratches in there. And after I clean this, I start to hand sand with the grain. I use my dollar store reading glasses wherever I set them. I don't have them in front of me at the moment. They're about 2.5 times. I've got several pairs sitting around, and I put those on and I look at the wood surface. I clean it and I look at the wood surface. If I don't get out all of the scratches, I turn around and I keep sanding with the grain. I clean it off real well, and now I'm ready to go to my next grit. So in the case of these signs, I went from 120 to 150. Now I use a random orbital sander. Mine's a Bosch. And I sand the whole surface with the 150. I clean it off, okay? And then I turn around again, I hand sand with 150, and using my magnifying glasses, I turn around and I make sure I got out all the previous grits scratch marks, which would be the 120. Clean it off real well, and then I'll go to the next grit. Now, in the case of the wood signs, I probably could have stopped at 150. I didn't. I don't know why, but anyway, I went to 220. Same procedure, cleaned it off real well. I wiped the whole thing down at that point with mineral spirits. You can do that anywhere along the way that you want. It'll give you an idea of what the wood looks like with a clear finish. That's one option, but it cleans the surface real well. Then I turned around, I applied my light stain to it, which you see here. I let it dry for a couple of days. I live out in desert cities, like I mentioned in my videos. It's real hot, and it's totally dry, okay? And then I lightly go over it with like 4/0 steel wool, or I have some 3M pads that are like ultra fine. And all that does is I'm just getting like the little nibs off of it that might be on there. Now, this is in the case of just these wood signs. There are a few more steps that we'll talk about when I talk about the next project that I did. Okay, but then that's about it. And then I turn around and I decide, okay, what kind of a finish do you want to put on these? Now in this case, this was spray lacquer. I've got a hobby sprayer. It's a Badger. I'll leave you the links below on this stuff. It's really, really handy for small projects. I mix up my own lacquer and I coat these. And this turns out to be, well, a finished product. And it looks pretty good. Now, I'm going to get another project here and I'm going to show you how I went about it, which is a little bit different, okay? But it will take you, like I said, from a mediocre finish to really an outstanding finish, or one that's incredibly better than most people, that you see. And I get a lot of compliments on some of the finishes, but it takes more time. But that more time involved gives it a much, much better finish. It also makes it much easier to sell. Give me just a sec, I'll be right back with you, and I'll show you a couple of them that I did, and we'll discuss the procedure that I used then. Okay, now let's talk about the second project, which is going to be a little bit different. I have here, this is a wood turning. Let me set it right here and see if we can zoom in on this a little bit and show you a little bit better. Okay, now on that one, I have it on the lathe, which is spinning, but you can do this on flat work also. I use the same procedure, okay? Now, somebody made the remark, in the forum, well, if you're using anything as low as like 60 grit or 80 grit, you must be a real rookie, and kind of went on with some criticism. But like I said on the forums, they don't allow you to say anything bad about people. They keep it, like I said, fairly well policed. In any event, I thought it was kind of a crummy comment, and I responded to it by saying, look, if you have to use 60 grit for some wild reason, which is a super aggressive, sanding grit, it's a tool like anything else. And if you have to use 80 grit to start, and on some of these wood turnings I certainly did, because of how punky the wood was or the defects in it, and I couldn't get them out with just turning tools, well then, I use those grits of sandpaper like a tool, like anything else. So if you need to use it, you need to use it. In any event, to go on with how I achieved, a much greater finish, is, let's say I did the 80 grit, I cleaned it off, I sand lightly with the grain. This is a wood turning, a little bit different than flat work. And then I turned around after that and I clean it off real well. I look at it, I got out the previous grits, scratch marks, just like we talked about, and I go to the next grit. Okay, so let's say I get up to like 150. Okay, and I've sanded it with 150. Okay, then I turn around and I get it wet. Don't soak it. You're just getting it lightly wet, even like with a sponge or something like that. Just wipe it down, let it air dry super well. And the reason for that is it will raise the grain of the wood. Okay, I only do that like once, maybe twice, once in a blue moon. Usually once. I'll raise the grain. Okay, then I sand with my 150 again, and I'm going with the grain now because I wetted it, or got it wet, in between the lathe rotating and using 150 and then going with the grain by hand. I clean it off real well. I use my dollar store reading glasses, okay? Like I said, they're 2 or 2.5 times. Very cheap. Incredibly handy to have, because then I put these on and I take a very close look at the wood and see, did I get out those 120 grit scratch marks? If I didn't, you need to spend a little bit more time and get them out. And once you're satisfied that you have those scratches out and you clean it off real well, you can move on to the next grit. So let's say you did that and we're at 150 and now we go to 120. Now, whether you're using the random orbital on flat work or whether you're using a wood lathe, a lot of people don't have a wood lathe. I do. And anyway, so I machine sand with the 150. I clean it off real well, and then I go with the grain again. I use the reading store glasses. I keep a close eye on making sure I got out the previous grits, scratches, and sanding marks. And again, when I'm satisfied, I keep going forward. Now, I make a decision along the way. When I get up to around that 220 level, a lot of times they'll tell you 150, you're okay if you're going to put a film finish on there. I will always go to 220. I always do, just as a default. And then, if I'm going to put a film finish on there, I will clean the surface real well, sand with the grain at 220 after, the rotating, the mechanical sanding. And then, after sanding by hand real well, I will wet the project down with mineral spirits and I will let it dry super well. That gets the wood as clean as I can get it. I want that, especially if I'm going to apply like a spray polyurethane or if I'm going to apply lacquer in particular. At this point, how I finish the rest of this is dependent on the project and how I want to finish it. So I can turn around now and let's say I'm going to use lacquer. Okay, then I'll go ahead and I'll start to apply my coats of lacquer. And like I told you, I'll leave it in the description below, I use Watco Clear Gloss and I have my own lacquer thinner and I thin it down. Now you can use a rattle can. Deft makes decent lacquer. Whatever you want to use, okay, at that point. And those are discussions for another video because I'm just focusing in on the sanding. But your sanding protocol and the way that you sand a project has a lot to do with how outstanding that finish is going to turn out. And if you're selling these, people will pick them up and look at them and they're going to notice the defects. So I would encourage you, spend the time. I know it's a pain in the butt. Nobody likes sanding. And I didn't even bother to demo this on here because, if you want to watch a video on somebody sanding, it's really boring. I'm talking about just in discussion in the forum because somebody had said, how did you achieve such a great finish? And it's so smooth. And I know it's hard to do in video or from pictures. It's got like a warmth to it. And it's like I told them, I approach these differently each time. Now, out on the market, when you're out there and you decide, hey, how am I going to finish, some of these projects? I wrote a little list here. You can use polyurethane, you can use lacquer, shellac, varnish, wax, oil, whatever. Now, there are certain projects where I think, like if somebody wants a really nice, warm kind of a finish to it, it's not going to be gloss. And it's not going to, it'll get close to semi-gloss, but you could do an oil finish. And it's kind of like an easy, no-brainer kind of a thing, really. I mean, if the surface is flat, you're going to have to do a lot of, hand sanding, with wet, dry sandpaper. Then you can go up into the different grits. Then I might go up to 500, 600, 700, 800, whatever. And I keep hand sanding with oil. It's easier for me to do on a lathe, but like I said, that's a topic for another video. I just wanted to make sure that I clarified this because everybody thought, oh, you approach these in the exact same way all the time. No, I don't. I understand that with film finishes, I don't have to sand super high up into the grits, and I should probably stop. Like I said, everybody says 150, I go to 220. I have a great finish on there when I'm done, and that's what works for me. If something works differently for you, I think that's great, more power to you. But those are my thoughts on this, and that's kind of what I posted in the forum. On the sign, if I stop at 150 and I put maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 coats of lacquer, because lacquer is a thin film finish product. I like lacquer because, like I explained in my last videos, one coat you can set on there. Out here where I'm at, 30, 45 minutes maybe, it's enough, and it's set enough to where I can apply another coat. Each coat will burn into the previous coat, and it starts to build up. And so after a little bit of time practicing, you know, with your little hobby sprayer or whatever you use, you'll get better and better at understanding what I'm talking about, and it gives it a very nice clear finish. People like clear, they like glossy. There's a handful of other people. I'm one of them. It just depends on the kind of wood. Sometimes I prefer the warmth, and I'll just do oil sanding. But you know, that's a topic. I mean, we can discuss in another video how I oil sand. But that's it. And I mean, and that's the way I approach it. But I wanted to clarify everything. I hope you click subscribe. I hope you follow me. Drop me a comment below if you finish your wood projects another way. I'm always interested in how other people apply finishes. I've tried all of these things, from mixing my own shellac to using, you know, pre-manufactured and mixed stains. A lot of them are, you know, come from Minwax. You know, one of my favorites overall in the end is I use Howard's orange beeswax. I'll leave you a link for that. It lasts me a long time because you don't have to use a whole lot of it, and it's got orange oil in it. And that's just one of the products that I use. But I always tell people, I will always mention in my videos what I use specifically and how I use it, and I leave it in the link below, because what I find is I will see videos sometimes where I'm very interested in what the person's doing, but they either don't show exactly how they do it, or they don't show what product they're using. So, you know, I always try to do that. But those are my thoughts right now, and I don't want to make it a long video. So, like I said, I hope you folks stick with me. Give me a thumbs up. I'll see you on the next video, and you folks have a great day. Bye-bye.